Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Jack Miller had always lived by one rule: mind your own business and expect the same in return. His farm, standing strong for over a decade, was his pride until Maplewood Estates HOA crept to his borders. What started as petty complaints soon turned into a full-blown war. But when they stole from him, Jack knew. This time, they'd gone too far. Jack Miller had never been the type to seek conflict. A man in his mid-40s, he had spent the last decade tending to his land, enjoying the solitude that came with running a small farm on the outskirts of town. His property was more than just a home. It was a way of life. He took pride in his barn, where he housed his cows and chickens, and in the small wooden pen where his prized piglets played in the mud. Life was simple, predictable, and most importantly, his own. But all of that changed when Maplewood Estates HOA expanded its reach right up to the border of his land. The new Homeowners Association was the latest in a series of developments catering to the affluent. Rows of identical, pristine houses with their manicured lawns and strict regulations now stood where open fields had once been. It was a world away from Jack's rustic property, but that didn't stop Karen Wilson, the self-appointed ruler of Maplewood Estates, from making it her mission to bring Jack into compliance. The first confrontation came early one Saturday morning. Jack had just finished tending to his animals when he heard the unmistakable sound of high heels clicking against gravel. He turned to see a woman in a pressed blazer and oversized sunglasses striding toward him, a clipboard clutched in one hand and a look of disapproval plastered across her face. "You must be Jack Miller," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness. Jack wiped his hands on his jeans. "That's me. Something I can help you with?" Karen gave a tight-lipped smile and adjusted her sunglasses. "Karen Wilson, president of the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here to discuss some serious concerns regarding your property." She held up a document, waving it slightly as if she expected Jack to grab it. Jack didn't move. "I don't recall signing up for your HOA," he said, folding his arms. Karen let out a small laugh, the kind that said she wasn't used to being questioned. "Oh, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. You see, your property is right next to Maplewood Estates, and your farm—" She paused, glancing at the muddy pigs, the weathered barn, and the well-worn paths Jack had carved into the land. "Doesn't quite fit the aesthetic of our community. We have certain standards we like to uphold." Jack felt his patience thinning. "My land isn't part of your community." Karen's smile didn't falter, but her voice sharpened. "While that may technically be true, your property still affects the value of the homes in our development. We've received multiple complaints from residents about the smell from your livestock, the appearance of your structures, and, frankly, the general disarray of your farm." Jack exhaled through his nose, willing himself to stay calm. "This farm was here long before your HOA. I have no intention of changing anything." Karen tilted her head. "You may want to reconsider. The HOA has strict guidelines for maintaining neighborhood harmony. We'd appreciate it if you could start by taking down that barn. It's an eyesore from the second-floor balconies of several homes. And the pigs. Well, surely you don't need quite so many." Jack's hands clenched at his sides. "I'll tell you what, I'll reconsider when hell freezes over. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do." Karen's smile flickered, her grip tightening on the clipboard. "Mr. Miller, I'd hate for this to become a legal issue." Jack took a slow step forward, towering over her. "Then I suggest you stay off my land." Karen stared at him for a long moment before stepping back, her smile returning in a way that made Jack's stomach tighten with unease. "We'll see about that." She turned on her heel and strode back toward the street, her heels digging into the dirt as she left. Jack watched her go, exhaling slowly. He had the uneasy feeling that this wasn't the last time he'd be seeing Karen Wilson and her HOA rules. The confrontation with Karen Wilson was only the beginning. Jack Miller had expected her to be persistent, but he hadn't anticipated the sheer force with which the HOA would try to break him. At first, it was nothing more than an annoyance. Letters in the mail, each one stamped with the official Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association seal, filled with vague threats about community standards and property devaluation. Jack tossed them into the fireplace without a second thought. He had no intention of bending to a group of suburban busybodies, but then the harassment escalated. It started with anonymous complaints to the county. A health inspector arrived one morning, clipboard in hand, citing an official report that claimed Jack's farm was a hazard to public health. According to the complaint, his livestock was causing excessive odor, and his barn was a breeding ground for disease. Jack scoffed at the accusations. His animals were well cared for, and his property, while rustic, was far from unsanitary. He walked the inspector around the land, pointing out the clean enclosures, proper drainage, and healthy animals. After a thorough check, the inspector apologized, admitted there was no real violation, and left. Jack suspected Karen was behind the complaint, but he had no proof. Not yet. Days later, a second official arrived, this time from the zoning commission. The claim? Jack's barn was not up to code and had supposedly been built without proper permits. Jack shook his head in frustration. His barn had stood for nearly 15 years, long before Maplewood Estates was even built. He retrieved the original permits, showing them to the inspector, who again admitted there was no legal issue. The pattern was clear. Someone, Karen, was throwing everything she could at him, hoping something would stick. Then came the harassment from the neighbors. Jack had never cared much about the people in Maplewood Estates. They lived in their pristine cookie-cutter houses, sipping wine on their patios and complaining about the world around them. But now they were getting involved. One evening, as Jack loaded supplies into his truck, a well-dressed man approached from across the road. "Excuse me," the man said, arms crossed. "I live in Maplewood Estates, and I think we need to talk." Jack sighed, already knowing where this was going. "Yeah? About what?" The man adjusted his tie. "About your situation. The HOA has been very patient, but you're making things difficult. People in the neighborhood are concerned. We moved here for peace and order, and your farm, well, it doesn't exactly fit in." Jack tightened his grip on the truck bed. "It's my land. I don't have to fit in." The man exhaled sharply. "Look, we're reasonable people, but if you keep ignoring the HOA's requests, there will be consequences. Legal consequences." Jack clenched his jaw. "Is that a threat?" The man raised his hands. "Just a warning." Jack watched as he turned and walked away. The message was clear. They weren't going to stop. That night, as Jack sat on his porch with a cold beer, he realized something. This wasn't just HOA bureaucracy. This was a campaign, a full-fledged effort to force him out. It was time to fight back. The next morning, Jack drove into town and bought several high-quality security cameras. He installed them along the perimeter of his property, ensuring that any future attempts at harassment, trespassing, or sabotage would be caught on tape. He had a feeling he wouldn't have to wait long. Jack had barely finished setting up the last of his security cameras when the real attack came. It started as an ordinary morning, feeding the animals, checking the fencing, making sure the pigs had plenty of fresh water. Everything seemed normal until he noticed the broken latch on the pig pen. His gut tightened. Something was wrong. He counted the pigs. One was missing. At first, Jack thought maybe the piglet had squeezed through the fence somehow, but a quick scan of the area revealed no broken boards or gaps. That's when he saw them, deep tire tracks in the dirt, leading away from his property. Someone had taken his pig. Jack stormed back to his house and pulled up the security footage. The feed from one of the cameras showed exactly what had happened in the dead of night. A sleek black SUV had pulled up near the pig pen. 3 figures had climbed out. One of them, unmistakably Karen Wilson. Even in the grainy footage, Jack recognized her stiff posture, her expensive shoes sinking slightly into the mud. She was the one holding the bolt cutters. Jack's jaw clenched as he watched them cut through the latch, snatch one of his piglets, and bundle it into the back of the SUV like stolen goods. His blood boiled. He didn't waste time. Within minutes, he was in his truck, following the tire tracks that led straight into Maplewood Estates. Jack had no doubt where Karen had taken the pig. He had overheard talk in town about a fancy neighborhood barbecue she was hosting that very evening, an event meant to impress the most influential residents of Maplewood Estates. It had all the hallmarks of her style: lavish, self-congratulatory, and, apparently, featuring stolen livestock. By the time he arrived at Karen's house, the party was already in full swing. Expensive cars lined the street, and the sound of laughter and clinking glasses floated over the tall hedges that shielded her massive backyard. Jack parked his truck at the curb and marched straight to the gate, his fists clenched. Through the iron bars, he spotted his piglet, penned up near the pool, surrounded by decorations and a makeshift roasting station. It was still alive, but he could tell from the setup that it wouldn't be for long. The sight of it, his animal taken from his land, about to be sacrificed for some elite dinner party, made his blood run hot. Jack pushed open the gate and strode in, ignoring the startled gasps from partygoers. Conversations halted as the grizzled farmer walked straight toward the head of the table, where Karen sat, wine glass in hand, mid-toast. "Well, well, well," Jack said, his voice cold and cutting through the stunned silence. "I hope you've enjoyed your little celebration, Karen, because it's about to end." Karen barely blinked. "Jack," she said smoothly, setting her glass down. "I don't recall inviting you." Jack pointed to the penned pig. "That's mine. You stole it." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, while others exchanged glances. Karen sighed dramatically. "Oh, Jack, don't be so dramatic. It's just a pig. You have plenty more, don't you?" Jack's voice dropped, deadly serious. "That's not the point. That's my property. And you broke onto my land to take it." Karen's smirk faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Jack, let's be reasonable. This was a community effort. The neighbors agreed that your farm was a nuisance. And this pig," she waved a dismissive hand toward the frightened animal, "was a symbol of that nuisance. We're simply enjoying the benefits of a cleaner, more refined neighborhood." Jack took a deep breath, pulling out his phone. "And I suppose this video of you and your buddies cutting through my fence in the middle of the night was also a community effort." Karen's face drained of color. Jack turned toward the guests, raising his voice. "Congratulations, folks. You're all accessories to theft." Then, in an almost casual tone, he added, "The cops will be here any minute." A heavy silence settled over the party. Karen's well-dressed guests, many of whom had been laughing and sipping expensive wine just moments ago, now exchanged uneasy glances. Some took slow steps back, as if distancing themselves from the crime unfolding before them. Others murmured in hushed voices, their confidence in their esteemed HOA leader beginning to crumble. Karen, however, wasn't ready to back down. She let out a forced, breathy laugh and stood up from her chair, smoothing her designer blouse as if she were merely dealing with a slight misunderstanding. "Oh, Jack," she said, voice dripping with condescension, "you're really going to call the police over this?" "Over a pig?" Jack took a step closer, his boots crunching against the neatly manicured grass. His voice was low, firm. "It's not just a pig. It's theft. Trespassing, destruction of property. You broke the law, Karen, and now you're going to pay for it." Karen's jaw tightened, her fingers curling into fists at her sides, but she wasn't ready to let her authority slip. She turned toward the crowd and raised her voice, addressing the party guests rather than Jack. "Can you believe this?" she scoffed. "This man keeps a filthy, disgusting farm right next to our beautiful community, bringing down property values, ignoring our rules, and now he storms in here, uninvited, and accuses me of wrongdoing?" She let out a bitter chuckle. "This is harassment, plain and simple. If anything, I should be calling the police on him." Jack let her rant. He let her dig her own grave. Then, without breaking eye contact, he slowly held up his phone and pressed play. The video footage spoke for itself. The screen showed Karen and her two accomplices sneaking onto Jack's property under the cover of darkness, cutting through the latch on the pig pen, dragging the terrified animal into their SUV. The image was clear, undeniable. The crowd gasped. Someone muttered, "Oh my God!" Another whispered, "She actually did it." A few guests even stepped away from Karen, unwilling to be associated with what was clearly turning into a criminal act. Karen's face twisted in fury, her carefully curated image slipping. That video is fake," she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "He probably edited it. This is some kind of a vendetta against me." Jack smiled, waiting for the next blow to land. A voice cut through the tense air. "Ma'am, we're gonna need you to step away from the table." The police had arrived. Two uniformed officers entered the backyard, their presence commanding instant attention. One officer, a stocky man with sharp eyes, approached Jack first. "You called it in?" Jack nodded, slipping his phone into his pocket. "That's right. I have video proof of her breaking onto my land and stealing my livestock." The second officer, a tall woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, turned toward Karen. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you about this allegation." Karen's confidence shattered completely. Her face flushed a deep shade of red, and she stumbled over her words. "This is absurd. I am the president of the HOA. This is my home, my event. This man has been terrorizing us for months with his filthy farm. Why aren't you arresting him?" The officers remained unmoved. "Ma'am, we're here for the reported theft, not to enforce HOA bylaws." Jack folded his arms. "And if you check the pen by the pool, you'll find my stolen pig right there." One officer walked toward the enclosure, while the other gestured for Karen to stay put. The moment of truth had arrived. The backyard had fallen into dead silence, all eyes locked on the unfolding scene. The officer strode toward the poolside enclosure, where Jack's stolen piglet stood trembling in the makeshift pen. As soon as the officer reached the enclosure, the animal let out a sharp, frightened squeal, a clear confirmation that it did not belong here. The officer turned back to his partner, nodding. "It's here." Karen, standing rigid at the head of the table, clenched her fists so tightly that her manicured nails dug into her palms. She was cornered. Yet, instead of backing down, she doubled down. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. I didn't steal anything. That pig was abandoned. Left running loose, a hazard to the community. We rescued it. You should be thanking me for ensuring it didn't trample someone's yard or spread disease." Jack let out a dry laugh. "That's funny, Karen, because I have footage of you cutting through the fence and sneaking onto my land in the middle of the night." He turned toward the officers. "She wasn't rescuing anything. She was stealing my property." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some of the guests, who had been enthusiastically enjoying Karen's hospitality, now looked anywhere but at her, as if reconsidering their association with her. A few had even started edging toward the exit, not wanting to be caught up in whatever legal mess was about to unfold. Karen turned to the officers, her face contorted in frustration. "He's lying. This is a personal vendetta. He's always been a nuisance, refusing to comply with our HOA's guidelines, and now he's trying to embarrass me. This whole thing is insane. Are you really going to take this man's word over mine?" The taller officer, the one who had retrieved the pig, crossed her arms. "Ma'am, we have video evidence and a stolen animal on your property. This isn't about community standards. This is about trespassing and theft. And right now, we need you to cooperate." Karen blanched. The authority in the officer's tone made it clear that she wasn't talking her way out of this. Still, she wasn't about to go down without a fight. You don't understand," she stammered. "I was doing this for the good of the neighborhood. This man is ruining our property values, keeping disgusting animals next to luxury homes. We had to send a message." Jack narrowed his eyes. "So, you're admitting it. You took my pig to make a statement?" Karen's breath caught. She had trapped herself. The stocky officer exhaled and pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open. "Ma'am, you just admitted to intentionally taking livestock that didn't belong to you. That's theft. And let me remind you, livestock theft is a criminal offense." The reality of her situation finally hit Karen in full force. Her perfect, carefully curated reputation, her standing as the queen of Maplewood Estates, was crumbling before her eyes. Some of the guests who had once fawned over her were now quietly filming with their phones, capturing the exact moment when the HOA president fell from grace. She turned on her guests, her voice shaking with rage. "Are you all just going to stand there? Say something. Tell them I was only doing what was best for the community." A few people muttered half-hearted agreements, but most avoided eye contact. One woman, clutching a designer handbag, finally spoke up. "Karen, this has nothing to do with the HOA anymore. You stole from him." Karen's face twisted in fury. "You coward! You were happy to eat his pig, weren't you? And now you're turning on me?" The officer didn't give her another chance to speak. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Karen's head snapped toward him. "You can't be serious." The officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for theft and trespassing. You can either come quietly, or we can do this the hard way." Karen froze, staring at the handcuffs as if they were some foreign object she had never thought would apply to her. Jack watched as the color drained from her face. The moment she had spent years avoiding, the moment where she lost control, was finally here. Karen stood frozen, her eyes darting from the officers to the growing crowd of onlookers. This couldn't be happening. Not to her. Not in front of her guests. Not after everything she had built in Maplewood Estates. I can't be arrested," she stammered, her voice cracking. I'm the president of the HOA." The stocky officer didn't even blink. "Ma'am, being president of the HOA doesn't put you above the law. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The weight of the moment finally settled on Karen's shoulders. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. She glanced at the guests who had once hung on her every word, hoping for someone, anyone, to defend her. Instead, she found only averted gazes and quiet whispers. The people who had once admired her wanted nothing to do with her now. Jack watched as humiliation washed over her face. He almost expected another outburst, another attempt to manipulate her way out of it. But instead, Karen's body sagged, her shoulders slumping, as the realization hit her. She had lost. The officer took her by the wrist and snapped the cuffs around her hands. The sound echoed through the backyard, a final punctuation mark on her downfall. "No," Karen whispered, shaking her head as if denying reality would change it. "No, no, no. This is a mistake. I was protecting the community. This isn't fair. This isn't—" "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," the officer said as he began reading her rights. Karen thrashed, trying to shake off his grip. "Jack, you did this," she shrieked. "You and your filthy farm. You've ruined everything. You think you've won? You haven't. I'll get my lawyers. I'll sue you into the ground." Jack simply smirked. "Good luck with that, Karen. You're gonna need it." The officer guided her toward the front of the house, where a patrol car was already waiting. The crowd parted as she passed, some guests stepping away as if her downfall was contagious. No one spoke up for her. No one tried to stop it. As the car door slammed shut behind her, Jack exhaled slowly. It was over. But Karen's HOA wasn't out of the fight yet. And Jack knew there was still one final battle left to win. Karen's dramatic arrest sent shockwaves through Maplewood Estates. By the next morning, the story had spread across town like wildfire. Footage of her being led away in handcuffs circulated in community group chats, and a few party guests, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, leaked details to local news outlets. The once untouchable president of the HOA had become a public embarrassment. But for Jack, the battle wasn't over yet. With Karen behind bars, the HOA scrambled to control the damage. The board members, who had once blindly followed her, now tried to pretend they had no part in her schemes. A formal statement was released, claiming Karen had acted independently and that the HOA did not condone her actions. Jack wasn't buying it. He had endured months of harassment, the fake complaints, the bogus citations, the attempts to force him into compliance. Karen might have been their ringleader, but the HOA had enabled her every step of the way. So Jack did what Karen had never expected. He fought back. With his lawyer's help, he filed a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment, defamation, and attempted property interference. The evidence was overwhelming. Recordings of Karen's threats, video proof of her trespassing, and statements from officials who had been sent to investigate bogus claims against him. The lawsuit sent the HOA into a complete meltdown. Board members who had once been loyal to Karen turned on each other, desperate to avoid liability. Some resigned immediately, while others tried to cut a deal to protect themselves. But it was too late. The HOA couldn't withstand the legal fees and public backlash. Homeowners, furious at the misuse of HOA funds and Karen's reckless abuse of power, voted to dissolve the association entirely. Jack had won. Karen's empire was in ruins. The HOA, once a weapon against him, was gone forever. The same neighbors who had once supported the harassment now came to Jack's farm, not with complaints, but with apologies. And Jack, he was finally free to live in peace. But there was still one last thing left to do. A month after the fall of the HOA, Jack stood in his backyard, watching the sun dip low over his fields. The air was rich with the smell of grilled meat, laughter, and the sounds of people gathering, not in conflict, but in celebration. What had once been a battlefield between him and Maplewood Estates was now a place of reconciliation. Some of the very neighbors who had once supported Karen's crusade against him were now at his farm, shaking his hand, bringing side dishes, and, in some cases, offering heartfelt apologies. "You know, a man named Tom, a homeowner from Maplewood Estates, said, nudging Jack with his elbow. I never thought I'd say this, but I think I like this better than those stuck-up HOA wine tastings." Jack chuckled, flipping a steak on the grill. "Yeah. Probably helps that no one's trying to fine you for using the wrong color napkins." A ripple of laughter moved through the small crowd. Without the HOA breathing down their necks, The community felt more like an actual neighborhood instead of a policed suburb. People were relaxing, enjoying the night, and, for once, not living in fear of Karen's rules. And, speaking of Karen, Jack had heard through the grapevine that she had sold her house at a loss and moved out of town, too humiliated to stay after her arrest. Last he checked, she was still fighting legal battles, but without the HOA's backing, she was on her own. Jack turned back to the grill and smiled as he looked at the real guest of honor, his once kidnapped piglet, now fully grown, lounging in the dirt, very much alive. Some of the kids had taken a liking to him, throwing little bits of fruit into his pen and laughing as he snorted happily. "You know," Tom said, following Jack's gaze, "it's kind of ironic." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What is?" "That pig." Tom smirked. "Karen stole it, and now it's the most famous thing in the neighborhood. People even started calling it Little Karen as a joke." Jack let out a deep, satisfied laugh. "Fitting. The only difference is, this Karen actually belongs here." The night stretched on, filled with food, conversation, and the simple pleasure of a community finally free from unnecessary rules and power struggles. Jack had fought harder than he ever expected to keep what was his, but in the end, he hadn't just won a battle. He had changed an entire neighborhood for the better. And as he raised a cold beer, watching his neighbors, his real neighbors, enjoying the farm he had fought so hard to protect, he realized something. This wasn't just a victory. This was home.